The door was supposed to lead to the linen storage room. She had taken that corridor 100 times. Left at the iron staircase, right at the tapestry with the wolf and the moon, third door on the left. She had counted. She was certain she had counted. But when she pushed the door open in the dark, arms full of fresh bedding, candle in her hand already guttering in the draft, the room she stepped into was not the linen storage room. It was enormous. Stone walls hung with old weapons and older maps. A fireplace the size of a doorway burning low in gold. A desk covered in documents weighted down with a hunting knife. Books stacked in towers that reached the windowsill. The smell of cedar and cold iron and something else, something that hit the back of her throat and made her wolf go completely, absolutely still the way her wolf had never gone still before. And at the far end of the room, in the high-backed chair behind the desk, watching her with eyes that were the precise color of burning amber, the Alpha King of Valdenmoor, Crest Aldric, the most feared wolf in the Northern Territories. Watching her, she should have backed out of the room immediately. She should have apologized, retreated, closed the door, pretended it hadn't happened, found someone who outranked her and confessed the trespass before he could report it. She should have done all of those things. Instead, she stood frozen in the doorway with her arms full of bed sheets and her candle going out in the draft, and she stared at him, and she felt the door drift shut behind her with a soft and final click. And Crest Aldric looked at her for a long, terrible, unhurried moment. And then he said 4 words that changed everything. Put the linens down. She put the linens down. She did not leave for 3 days. If you have ever stumbled into a place you were never supposed to be and found exactly what you needed, this story knows your name. Like the video, hit that subscribe button right now and drop in the comments where you are watching from. We have people watching from every corner of this world. Let's get into it. Her name was Pell Carrow. She was 21 years old, a household worker at Valdenmoor Keep, the vast, stone, centuries-old fortress that served as both the residence of the Alpha King and the administrative center of the Northern Territories pack governance. She had been working at the keep for 2 years, assigned to the bedding and laundry division under a senior housekeeper named Greta, who had the efficient disposition of someone who had been managing large volumes of linen for 30 years and who had no remaining patience for complications or sentiment or anything else that interfered with the clean movement of fabric through its proper channels. Pell was not a complication. She was, in fact, the opposite of a complication. She was the worker Greta relied on for the tasks that required someone who could be trusted to be in the right place at the right time, without supervision and without drama. She was quiet. She was reliable. She was so consistently, invisibly competent that she had become, over 2 years, part of the background of the keep's daily operation in the way that load-bearing walls were part of a building, noticed only in the absence of them, which never happened because she was never absent. She liked it that way, not because invisibility was her preference as a human preference, not because she had no opinions or no inner life or nothing she would rather be doing. She liked it because she had spent 21 years learning the specific strategic value of being underestimated in rooms where estimation was power, and at Valdenmoor Keep, estimation was everywhere. The keep was a place built on estimation, on rank and bloodline and the careful social mathematics of knowing where you stood relative to everyone else and behaving accordingly. 60 household workers, 12 senior household staff, 40 administrative officials, 20 war commanders, the full council of 7, the regional advisors who came and went on cycles of political necessity. All of them were constantly, continuously calculating their position in relation to everyone else. Pell was outside the calculation. She was staff. She was below the level where the calculation became urgent. And below the level of urgency, there was freedom. She had spent 2 years using that freedom to read everything she could find. She had not come to Valdenmoor Keep because she wanted adventure or proximity to power or the specific kind of excitement that some young wolves sought when they left their home packs and came to the capital's great household. She had come because the wages were reliable, the room was private, and Valdenmoor was 4 territories away from the place she had grown up. 4 territories felt like the right distance. She had reasons for wanting distance. Her home pack, a mid-sized collective called Grey Vale in the Western Mountains, was the kind of place that was fine if you occupied the right category, had the right connections, filled the right role in the right way. If you fit cleanly into the established understanding of what you were, Grey Vale was perfectly livable. Pell had never quite fit cleanly. Her mother had been a full Grey Vale wolf, embedded in the pack's social structure, known by everyone, part of the collective in all the ways that mattered. Her father had been visiting blood, a wolf from a different territory, passing through, staying longer than expected, leaving sooner than her mother had planned for. He had left when Pell was 3. She barely remembered him as a person. She remembered his shoes by the door of the cottage, large, worn at the heel, smelling of the southern forest, and then the absence of the shoes. And then her mother's face learning a new shape. The shape of a woman incorporating a permanent absence into her daily architecture and learning to work around it. She had grown up watching her mother carry that. And she had grown up carrying, herself, the specific inheritance of having been the product of an absent parent in a pack that noted these things. Not cruelly. The Grey Vale wolves were, on balance, decent. They included her. They did not exclude her. She was fed and housed and given work and taught the pack traditions alongside everyone else. And in every formal, measurable sense, she was a full member of the community. But packs knew things that they did not say in the official record. They held knowledge in the social fabric the way bodies held old injuries, in the slight adjustment, the barely there accommodation, the specific quality of inclusion that was always slightly different from the inclusion they extended to the wolves whose history was uncomplicated. She had felt it every day for 19 years. Not as oppression, as a faint, constant, ambient awareness that the space she occupied was welcome but also annotated. She wanted to be somewhere that had no annotation. Somewhere she could be seen fresh, with no prior record, no inherited notation, just herself as she currently was rather than herself as the product of a history she hadn't chosen. Valdenmoor Keep, where she was one of 60 household workers and nobody had any particular reason to know her history, had turned out to be exactly that. And then, in the dark of a Thursday corridor with her arms full of bedsheets, she had miscounted doors. And the annotation question had become, in an entirely unexpected way, moot. What Pell Carrow came to understand, in the year after the mate bond was formally acknowledged and the year after that, and the years that followed, was something about the nature of belonging. She had spent her life treating belonging as something that was given by the people around you. The collective decision of a community about whether you fit within it. She had accepted that framework so completely, for so long, that she had organized her entire interior life around it. Made herself smaller, quieter, more useful, more invisible, trying to reduce the friction of existing in places where she wasn't sure she was fully welcome. She had done this in Grey Vale for 19 years. She had done a version of it at the Keep for 2 years. And then she had taken a wrong turn in the dark with a pile of linens in her arms, and she had stumbled into a room she had no right to be in, and a man who had been the Alpha King since he was 26 had said, "Put the linens down." And instead of backing out, instead of apologizing, instead of doing any of the things a person who had organized themselves around reducing friction would have done, she had put the linens down and started talking. And the thing she understood now was this. Belonging was not something that was given to you. It was something you brought with you. She had always belonged. She had belonged at the end of the Grey Vale table, even when they put her there. She had belonged in the Keep's corridors and the household reference library and the overflow document cabinets at the far end and the correspondence archive she was technically not supposed to have accessed. She had belonged, from the very first night, in the study with the fireplace and the document-covered desk, and the man who had listened to her as though what she said was worth listening to. She had belonged all along. She had simply needed, in the particular darkness of a wrong corridor, to open the wrong door. The wrong door had been the right one. That was the thing about the doors you were not supposed to open. Sometimes the room on the other side was exactly where you were supposed to be. If this story found you, really found you, you already know why. Because Pell Carrow wasn't found by a king. She was found by a door she wasn't supposed to open, and a conversation that wasn't supposed to happen, and the slow, terrifying, extraordinary discovery that she had been worth seeing this whole time. And maybe you have been standing in a corridor, in the dark, counting doors, trying to find the right one. Trying to find the place where you fit without friction. Trying to figure out if you are allowed to be going where you are going. You are allowed. You have always been allowed. Sometimes the right room is behind the wrong door. Sometimes the conversation that changes everything starts with a pile of dropped linens and a man who asks, "Which section of the historical documents do you find interesting?" This channel exists for everyone who has ever taken a wrong turn and found something they couldn't have found if they'd stayed on the path. Every week, we tell stories about that. About wolves who stumbled into the right place. About bonds that found people who weren't looking. About doors that opened into lives that were larger than what was planned. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Drop your location in the comments because you are not watching this alone. There are people from every country in those comments, and one of them is from right where you are, and they needed this today too. Don't miss the next story. It might open with a wrong door. It might be yours. She had been 3 weeks into her second year at the Keep when she first saw Crest Aldric in any meaningful way. She had seen him before, of course, glimpses in corridors, the distant figure at the head of formal processions, the specific quality of commotion that preceded his movement through the Keep's public spaces. He was not invisible in the way that Pell was invisible. He was the opposite of invisible. His presence compressed the air around him the way high-pressure compressed weather. But she had not seen him, in the sense of actually being present in the same space with her full attention, until the morning of the Eastern Council delegation's arrival. She had been in the upper corridor carrying the good linens, the formal occasion ones, kept separately from the everyday stock, heavier and finer, brought out for dignitary visits. When the council delegation came up the main staircase with their escort, 14 wolves, senior delegates from the eastern packs, moving with the contained energy of people who had important things to do and were being made to do them at someone else's schedule. Crest Aldric had been at the top of the staircase waiting for them. She had been 3 feet behind him, pressed against the corridor wall to let the procession pass, invisible in the way she had learned to be invisible in corridors when important things were happening. Still, quiet, not requiring any space. He had turned his head, just slightly, in her direction as the delegation reached the landing, not looking at her. Just the instinctive peripheral awareness of a very powerful wolf who always knew what was in the space around him. But for 1 second, his profile had been 3 feet from her face, and she had seen him as a person rather than a title. The set of his jaw, the particular quality of his stillness, not the stillness of someone waiting, but the stillness of someone already in motion in all the ways that mattered and simply not yet physically expressing it. The way his eyes had moved over the delegation with the same efficiency and total absence of wasted attention that she had been told characterized everything he did. Then the delegation had passed, and he had moved away, and she had continued down the corridor with her arms full of good linens. She had thought about the set of his jaw for longer than was sensible. She had told herself, with the practical honesty she had always applied to inconvenient observations, that a household worker thinking about the Alpha King's jaw was a category error she was not going to entertain. She had entertained it anyway. Just briefly. Just until the work took over. It always did. The thing about Valdenmoor Keep that nobody told you before you came there was how old it was. Not just old in the way of stone that had been standing for centuries, though it was that too. old in the specific wolf history sense of having been built when the Northern Territories were still being organized, before the current hierarchy had fully settled, before the Alpha King position had taken on its current form and its current weight. The keep had been built by the first Valdenmoor Alpha, a wolf named Crest I, which was why the current Alpha King was Crest Aldric, the seventh king of the Valdenmoor line, the seventh crest in a dynasty that had maintained itself through 7 generations of careful, strategic, deliberate continuation. She had learned this from the keep's historical documents. She had learned a great deal from the historical documents. The keep's household reference library was not, technically, a research archive. It was a practical reference resource. Current governance procedures, household management guidelines, the administrative codes that govern staff conduct, and the organizational structures of the keep's various divisions. Practical documents for practical purposes. But the reference library also had 2 unlocked cabinets at the far end, which held overflow documents from the main archive, documents that had been placed there at some point for some reason and which had never been moved back because the archive system had evolved and the cabinets had slipped out of the inventory. Pell had found those cabinets in her 3rd month. She had been thorough about their contents. This was how she had come to know about the renovation correspondence between the 3rd and 4th kings, about the maintenance logs, about the architectural changes that had rerouted the East Wing corridors 3 times in 3 centuries, about the treaty archives and the territorial agreements and the records of how Valdenmoor had grown from one Alpha's stronghold into the administrative center of 7 integrated packs. She had read it all, not with any particular purpose, with the deep, ranging, restless curiosity that had always been her most consistent quality, the quality that had made her the girl who asked why in a pack where the answer was always because, who read the governance correspondence at council refreshment duty instead of the domestic accounts she was supposed to be reviewing, who had left Greyvale not entirely because she wanted to be somewhere unknown, but also because the knowing she had done in Greyvale had run out of new things to know. Valdenmoor Keep had not run out of new things. She did not expect it to. She had been 3 weeks into her 2nd year at the Keep when she first saw Crest Aldric in any meaningful way. "Put the linens down," Crest Aldric had said. She had put the linens down. They had landed on the floor in a soft, somewhat undignified pile, because her arms had simply released them the way arms release things when the body is busy with more urgent processing. He had looked at the pile of linens, then at her. Close the door. She had closed the door. "Come here." She had not moved. Not from defiance. Defiance would have required a level of collected thought she was not currently capable of. She had simply not moved because her legs had decided, independently of her mind, that they were not going to carry her across this room toward this man on the instruction of a person she had just stumbled into illegally by accident. Something passed through his expression. Not irritation. Something almost like interest. "You're not going to come here," he said, less as a question and more as an observation. "I'm going to explain," she said. Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. The East Wing corridor layouts were changed in the renovation 3 years ago. The historical documents show the linen storage was 2 doors to the right of where it currently is. I miscounted. This was not intentional. I am going to pick up these linens and leave, and I am very sorry for the intrusion. A pause. "You've read the historical maintenance documents," he said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because they were in the household reference library, and I find them interesting." He looked at her. Just looked at her, with those amber eyes and the specific quality of full, undivided attention that she was discovering was far more disconcerting in person at close range than it had been in brief corridor glimpses. "Which section?" She blinked. "Which section of what?" "The maintenance documents." "Which section do you find interesting?" She stood in the doorway of the Alpha King's private study with a pile of dropped linens at her feet and said, somewhat helplessly, "The renovation correspondence. The arguments between the 3rd and 4th kings about whether to expand the North Tower. It goes on for 11 years. His expression did something she could not read. The fourth king won, he said. I know. But the third king's original reasoning was more structurally sound. The North Tower expansion compromised the East Wing's load-bearing integrity. You can see the repairs in the maintenance logs from 60 years later. Silence. The fire in the enormous fireplace cracked and resettled. Sit down, Crest Aldric said. It was not, Pell would later reflect, the instruction that a sensible person would have followed in that situation. She sat down. She was not sure, afterward, how the conversation lasted as long as it did. It started with the North Tower. Then it moved, through some logic she could not reconstruct precisely, to the Eastern Pact's current territorial dispute, which she had apparently read enough of the governance correspondence to have opinions about. Then it moved to the history of the mate bond legal protections in the Northern Territories, which she had found in an archive section she was almost certain she was not supposed to have accessed, but which had been improperly filed and had therefore been accessible. At some point the fire had been restoked. At some point the documents she had referenced had been located and spread on the desk between them. At some point she had stopped being frightened. She was not sure exactly when that had happened. It was a gradual thing, like the way the sky shifted from dark to light, imperceptible at any single moment, unmistakable in aggregate. What she had discovered, in the hour she spent in the Alpha King's study that should have been 2 minutes, was this. Crest Aldric was extraordinarily intelligent. This was not what she had expected. She had expected authority and power and the specific gravity of a wolf who carried the history of 7 kings. She had not expected the quality of his questions, precise, following the thread of her reasoning with an attention that felt like being understood rather than being assessed, building on what she said rather than simply waiting for her to finish. She had also discovered, somewhat to her alarm, that she was not intimidated by his intelligence. She was energized by it. This was a problem. She noticed the problem at approximately midnight, when she had been in the study for 2 hours and was explaining, with more animation than she had employed in any conversation in 2 years at the Keep, her theory about why the Eastern Territorial dispute was actually a resource access problem disguised as a boundary question. He was listening, really listening, in the way that very few people listened, not politely, not performatively, but with the complete engagement of a man who had just encountered information worth paying attention to. She became aware of herself. She became aware of the 2 hours. She became aware that she had come in here with a pile of linens and had somehow ended up discussing Northern Territories governance theory with the Alpha King at midnight, and that this was not a circumstance she had any framework for. I should go, she said. He looked at her. The Eastern Council meeting is in 3 days, he said. The territorial dispute is on the agenda. Come back tomorrow night, and we will continue this. She stared at him. I work in the linen division, she said. I know. That's not, she stopped. I'm not supposed to be here. You weren't supposed to be here tonight either, he said. That didn't seem to stop either of us from having a useful conversation. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Tomorrow night, he said. The correct door is the one with the iron handle. 3rd door on the right, not the left. You won't get lost again. She picked up the pile of dropped linens. She walked to the door. She stopped. She did not know what made her stop. Her wolf, which had been absolutely quiet from the moment she entered the room. Not the quiet of fear, something else, the specific quiet of total, focused attention. Her wolf moved slightly. Not a surge, not a recognition. A leaning. Why? She asked. He didn't ask what she meant. Because in the last 2 years, he said, no one in this keep has told me something I didn't already know. She stood at the door with the linens in her arms. She left. She came back the next night. She came back because she was, at the core of her, someone who followed the thing that was interesting. She had spent her entire life managing that quality. In Greyvale, interesting had been a word used almost synonymously with trouble, The girl who asked why when the pack said because, who read things she wasn't supposed to read, who noticed the things that went unsaid in council meetings she was only attending to serve refreshments. They were not unkind about it. They were patient. But there was a particular patience that was different from acceptance, that said we see what you are, and we are waiting for you to grow out of it. And she had eventually understood that she was not going to grow out of it, and had made her arrangements accordingly. She had come to Valdenmoor and learned to be invisible, which was not the same as suppressing the quality. It was redirecting it. Invisibility, for a person who needed to know things, was a tool. The people who didn't notice her were also the people who didn't manage what she heard and saw and remembered. She had heard and seen and remembered a great deal in 2 years. And on the 7 nights she spent in the Alpha King's study, she had finally, for the first time in a very long time, been in a room where the quality itself was welcome, where asking why was not an inconvenience to be managed, but the entire point of the conversation, where the things she had spent 21 years learning to redirect had somewhere to go directly. She came back because she had found the thing she hadn't known she was looking for, and it was sitting behind a desk covered in governance documents with amber eyes and the specific attention of a man who had also, finally, found someone who wanted to know what he actually thought. They were both, she understood on the 3rd night, people who had been slightly too large for the space available to them. They had both been making themselves fit. And the room, the wrong room, the room she had stumbled into accidentally by misreading a corridor she had read correctly 100 times before, that room had been, precisely and accidentally, exactly the right size for both of them. She came back the 2nd night. She came back the 3rd. And on the 4th night, when the map of the Eastern Territorial Dispute was spread between them, and she had been explaining her resource access theory for 40 minutes, and he had been asking questions that refined and extended her thinking in ways that consistently surprised her, she paused in the middle of a sentence. He looked up. "What?" he asked. "I'm trying to figure out," she said slowly, when this stopped being about the map. He was quiet for a moment. "3rd night," he said, "when you told me about your father's shoes." She looked at the map. "That's an extremely specific answer," she said. "I have a very specific memory." She looked at him. Her wolf, which had been leaning quietly in his direction since the 1st night, was no longer leaning. It had simply arrived. It was fully present, fully certain, in the way that her wolf was never fully present and certain about anything. She was in considerable trouble. She admitted privately, not particularly interested in leaving it. She had known the corridors had changed. She had read that in the maintenance logs. She had simply failed. On a Thursday night with her arms full of formal dining linens and a guttering candle and a specific distraction of running through the council meeting preparation checklist in her head, to apply that information to the practical matter of navigating the East Wing in the dark. Left at the iron staircase. Right at the tapestry with the wolf and the moon. 3rd door on the left. She had been certain about the count. She was always certain about counts. The 3rd door on the left, in the current configuration of the East Wing, was not the linen storage. It was the Alpha King's private study. She had understood this approximately 2 seconds after the door drifted shut behind her. She had understood it from the smell, cedar and cold iron, and something that made her wolf go absolutely still, and from the fire in a fireplace the size of a doorway, and from the documents weighted down with a hunting knife, and from the amber eyes looking at her from across the room with the specific quality of a man who had been interrupted and was determining whether the interruption was going to require him to do anything about it. She had dropped no linen. She had said nothing. She had stood absolutely still in the way she had learned to be still in the presence of anything that required her to think very quickly. The amber eyes had moved over her. Not dismissively, assessingly, the way a wolf assessed a new element in a familiar space, determining its nature. Then he had said, "Put the linens down." She had put them down, and the door had closed behind her. And 3 days later she was still there. Not because he had kept her there by force. Not because she had been unable to leave. She had left at the end of the first night, and the second, and the third, each time making her way back through the correct corridor, third on the right, iron handle, and back to the household quarter where she slept and where everything was ordinary. She had come back because the study was where the thing was. The thing she had not known she was looking for until she stumbled into the room where it lived. She was 21 and had never felt the mate bond before. She had heard it described 100 different ways, had read the old texts on it, the clinical descriptions and the poetic ones, and the old pack songs that tried to put it into language and always fell slightly short. She knew the cataloged signs, the specific warmth, the directional certainty, the wolf's recognition, the feeling of something slotting into place that had always been slightly loose. She had expected, when it came, to be certain about what it was. What she got instead was this. Every time she was in the room with Crest Aldric, she was more herself than she was at any other time. Not comfortable, exactly. Not peaceful. Actually the opposite of peaceful. She was more alert, more alive, more fully present than she had ever been in any other room. And this was both wonderful and acutely, profoundly alarming because the room she was most herself in was the Alpha King's private study, which she was attending under circumstances that she could not explain to anyone, and which she was increasingly certain she should stop. She did not stop. On the fourth night, she stayed until 2 in the morning. On the fifth night, he asked her about Greyvale. Not about the pack's official standing, or its council representation, or its territorial position. Those things he would have known from governance files. He asked about what it was like to grow up there. She told him the truth. Not because she had decided to. Because in the specific quality of his listening, the truth was the only thing that fit. She told him about her father's shoes by the door, and then their absence. About the end of the table. About leaving at 19 and the particular feeling of a place where you were welcome, but not fully seen. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. I was born in this keep, he said. Then, after a pause that felt like a man deciding something. The people here have known me since I was born, and not one of them has ever spoken to me the way you do in these rooms. She looked at him across the desk. How do I speak to you? Like a person I'm talking to, he said. Not a position I'm required to address. The fire cracked. She felt her wolf lean further toward him, slow and certain, the way a tide moved. She was in considerable trouble. On the seventh night, Greta found out. Not about the conversations. Greta did not know about the conversations, and would not have known what to make of them if she had. What Greta knew was that Pell had been absent from her evening duties twice in the past week, which was aberrational enough for Greta's record to flag, and that the East Wing's linen delivery schedule was 2 days behind, and that this was not acceptable. Greta found her in the East Wing corridor at 10 in the evening on her way to the third door on the right, and the resulting conversation was short, direct, and left Pell with a formal warning logged against her household record. She stood in the corridor after Greta left and looked at the iron-handled door. She should stop. She knew she should stop. The gap between what was happening in those rooms and what her actual life was supposed to consist of was the width of the entire pack hierarchy, and she was not. She was careful to be honest about this. She was not a woman who made decisions based on the hope that gaps of that width could be bridged by conversations, however good the conversations were. She was also, she admitted to herself, standing in the corridor and not walking away from the door. She opened it. Crest Aldric looked up from his desk. You're late, he said. I had a warning logged, she said. My supervisor found out I was missing evening duties. What did you tell her? Nothing. There's nothing I could tell her. He set down the document he was holding. He looked at her with that full, amber attention. Sit down, he said. I think I should stop coming, she said. I think this, she stopped. Started again. I don't know what this is. But it can't be what it feels like. And it's not fair to either of us to pretend it's just conversations about governance theory. Silence. He stood up from the desk. He was very tall, she thought, somewhat irrelevantly. He had always been tall in the corridor glimpses, but the study had normalized that somehow, given her somewhere to put her attention that wasn't the physical fact of him. Now, standing, with nothing between them, the physical fact was fully present. "What does it feel like?" he asked. She held his gaze. She was not going to say it. She was absolutely not going to say what it felt like, because what it felt like was the kind of thing that once said could not be unsaid, and she had spent 2 years at this keep being invisible and sensible and not creating situations that couldn't be resolved cleanly. "It feels like something I can't afford," she said. He crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet from her. This close, the smell of cedar and cold iron that had been the room's ambient scent resolved into him specifically, and her wolf made a sound inside her that she had never heard her wolf make before, something between a recognition and a cry, something that had no modern wolf language for it, but that the oldest part of her understood with complete, immediate certainty. "I know what it feels like," he said quietly. "I have been trying to name it since the first night." "Don't," she said. "Why?" "Because if you name it, then I have to figure out what to do about it, and there is nothing I can do about it. I am a linen worker, Crest. You are the Alpha King. The distance between those things is—" "I know what the distance is," he said. "Then you know why I should leave." "I know why you think you should leave," he said. "That's not the same thing." She stared at him. "My whole council will object," she said. "Your advisors will object. Every ranked wolf in this building will have an opinion about this, and all of those opinions will be the same opinion, and they will not be wrong about the practical reality." "No," he said. "They won't be wrong about the practical reality. So you understand." "I understand that the practical reality is a set of obstacles," he said. "I do not accept that obstacles are conclusions." She opened her mouth. He held up one hand. Not a command, a request. The specific gesture of a man who needed one more sentence before the conversation moved. "Stay tonight," he said. "Just tonight. After that, I won't ask you to come back. I won't make this harder than it already is. But I need one more conversation that isn't about what we should do about this." She should have said no. She sat down. They talked until dawn. Not about governance. Not about territorial disputes or architectural history or the correspondence of long-dead kings. They talked about the things that didn't fit in official records. The personal interior of 2 people who had both, in different ways and for different reasons, learned to keep their most real selves out of the rooms where they were required to be something specific. He told her about growing up in this keep. About being Crest Aldric from his first coherent memory. Not a child with a name, but a title with a child attached to it, who would one day be the Alpha King and who was raised, with the specific thoroughness of a man who understood legacy, to be ready for that. His father had not been unkind. He wanted her to understand that clearly, because he had spent years being careful not to be unfair to a man who had loved him in the limited but genuine way of someone who loved his work and his son with approximately equal devotion and could not always tell the difference between those 2 things. Crest VI had devoted himself to preparing his heir. He had been present. He had been consistent. He had taught everything he knew with the patience of someone who understood that the knowledge needed to transfer fully. He had simply never asked what Crest wanted. Not because he didn't care. Because it genuinely had not occurred to him that wanting was a category that applied in this context. The king was the king. The job was the job. What the king wanted was irrelevant to what the king was required to do, and teaching the son to accept this was itself part of the preparation. Crest had accepted it, and it had worked. By every objective measure, the preparation had worked. He was an excellent Alpha King. He made good decisions. He led well. He had maintained the coalition his father built and expanded it, and improved its governance in measurable ways, and the Northern Territories were, under his rule, more stable and more functional than they had been in 30 years. He was, in the room with 7 nights of honest conversation behind them, tired in the specific way that excellent people were tired when excellence had been the only category available to them for a very long time. He was not unhappy. He wanted her to know that. He was lonely in the way that people were lonely when they were surrounded by people who needed them. She understood that. She told him she understood that. And something in his face, in the specific quality of being understood precisely rather than approximately, shifted in a way that she had not expected and that she would not forget. He told her about his father in the same honesty she had given him about her mother. Not the edited version, the full one. And she listened the way she always listened to him, with the total, unhurried engagement of someone who had found that what he said was worth paying full attention to, and who was not going to pretend otherwise. The fire burned down to coals between them. Do what? Ask questions that are different from the question I'm expecting. I answer before I realize I've been redirected. It's not a technique, she said. It's just, I'm interested in what you actually think. The official position is in the governance documents. No one has ever been interested in what I actually think, he said. They're interested in what the Alpha King thinks. Those aren't the same thing. No, he said. They're not. She told him about Grey Veil in the same honesty. Not the abbreviated version. Not the one she kept ready for casual questions. The one that was accurate but trimmed of its weight. The full version. The shoes by the door and their absence, and the long practice of belonging to a place that had also, always, carried the notation of what she was not. The way she had left at 19, not fleeing, but choosing, because there was a difference between running away and walking toward, and she had been very careful to be doing the second one, even when it looked like the first. He listened to all of it. In the way he listened to everything, with the full, unhurried engagement of a man who had stopped pretending other things were more important than what was happening right in front of him. You have been understanding your own situation on your own terms, he said, since you were old enough to understand there were terms. Someone had to, she said. Yes, he said. Someone had to. He paused. I have been doing the same thing, in a different room. The fire burned down to coals between them. The dawn was coming up gray and certain, and everything that had been building across 7 nights was fully, quietly, undeniably present in the room. Pell, he said. Don't, she said softly. The bond. I know. She held his gaze. I know. I've known for 3 days. My wolf knew the first night. She stopped. I wasn't ready to know it. And now I know it, and I still don't know what to do about it. The silence that followed was the most honest silence she had ever sat in. There are people in this keep, he said carefully, who will not want this to be real. I know. Not just because of rank. There are political reasons. My council has been managing a succession question for 2 years. There are alliances in place that depend on specific assumptions about who the Alpha King will eventually choose. She looked at him. Who, she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Valdenmoor Keep, he said. My head advisor. He has been positioning his niece. She's from a strong southern bloodline, good standing, appropriate status in every measurable way for the past 18 months. Pell absorbed this. Does he know about these nights? No. No one does. How long before someone does? Greta already knows you've been absent from duties. She doesn't know why. When she finds out, he stopped. She will tell someone. It will reach Valdenmoor. She looked at the window, where the first pale suggestion of dawn was beginning to find the sky. What happens then? She asked. Then, he said, it becomes complicated in ways I want you to understand before it happens. She turned back to him. Tell me. What he told her was this. Valdenmoor Keep was not simply an ambitious man managing a political placement. He was a man who had been, for 11 years, the primary architect of Crest Aldric's rule. Not the power behind the throne, nothing as dramatic as that, but the organizer. The one who built the consensus, managed the council, shaped the agenda, ensured that the Alpha King's decisions were supported before they were announced. He was extraordinarily good at his job. He was also, Crest told her with the careful precision of a man who had been thinking about how to say this for a long time, extraordinarily invested in the continuation of arrangements that kept him indispensable. An Alpha King with a true mate bond, particularly to a wolf outside the established political circles, a wolf with no bloodline leverage and no network of obligations, was an alpha king who was less predictable, less manageable, more likely to make decisions based on what he actually wanted rather than what the carefully constructed political architecture recommended. Belward would see Pell as a threat not because she had power, but because she would give Crest something more dangerous than power. She would give him independence. "He'll try to remove you," Crest said. Not dramatically. Factually. How? Through the household structure first. Get you reassigned, transferred, quietly removed from proximity. If that doesn't work, he paused. Belward has been doing this for 11 years. He's good at finding pressure points. She thought about that. She thought about her warning from Greta. About the carefully documented household record. About the way a person could be quietly, legitimately, paperwork supportedly removed from a position without anyone needing to do anything dramatic. "He already knows I exist," she said. "I think so." The timing of Greta's warning was, he stopped. Greta has worked in this keep for 20 years. She is thorough but not vindictive. The warning was procedurally correct, but unusually fast. Someone moved quickly. Yes. She sat with that. The dawn was fully starting now, gray and early, the specific light of very early morning that made everything look provisional. "What do you want to do?" she asked. He looked at her. "I want to be honest about what this is," he said. "Publicly. Not because I want to fight with Belward. He's not wrong that it will complicate things. But because the alternative is pretending the bond isn't real, and I don't." He stopped. "I spent 34 years being what this position needed," he said. "I would like, once, to be what I actually am." She looked at him for a long time. The fire was dead. The dawn was coming up gray and certain. She had been in this room for 7 hours, or for 7 nights, depending on how you counted, and she was not the person who had stepped through the wrong door a week ago. She was not sure yet exactly what person she was becoming. But she was interested in finding out. "All right," she said. The next 2 weeks were the most complicated of her life. They were also the most alive she had ever been. The complication was structural and relentless. Belward Crest, who turned out to be a thin, clever man of 50-something with the specific quality of intelligence that comes from spending decades managing the space between what powerful people wanted and what was politically achievable, moved against her with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and who had the system's full cooperation because the system had been built, in part, for this exact purpose. She was reassigned within the keep first, moved from the East Wing linen division to the North Wing laundry, which was 2 floors below and as far from the Alpha King's private study as the keep's geography allowed. The reassignment was procedurally clean. Greta had the paperwork ready in a day. Every step was technically justifiable. Nothing about it was innocent. She worked the new assignment without complaint. She also, on the second day, requested a formal meeting with the keep's household oversight officer, a senior administrator named Quist whose responsibilities included the welfare and fair treatment of household staff. And she lodged a formal notification that she had been reassigned in connection with her documented warning and that she was serving the new assignment under protest, citing the procedural timeline as unusually accelerated. Not a complaint. A notification. The language was careful and cooperative, and the paper trail it created was exactly what she intended. Quist had looked at her across the meeting table with the expression of a man who had just encountered something he had not expected to encounter in a meeting with a laundry worker. "You're familiar with the household procedures," he said. "I've read the governing documents," she said. "Most household workers don't read those. I read things that are available to me," she said pleasantly. "Is there a reason I shouldn't have?" He made careful notes. She left the meeting having documented her position in the administrative record where it would be very difficult to quietly remove. Belward's second move came through the council 3 days later. She learned about it not directly. She had no official access to council proceedings, but through the specific quality of the keep's social atmosphere, which shifted in the way that any closed community's atmosphere shifted when something was being discussed among the people at the top. She felt it in how the senior household staff spoke to her, in the fractional adjustments of people who had become aware that her situation had become politically loaded and were calibrating accordingly. She had grown up reading those adjustments. She was very good at them. What the council had done, specifically, was raise a formal question about the appropriateness of any household staff member being placed in a situation of elevated proximity to the Alpha King without proper vetting and clearance. It was framed as a general governance matter. It was aimed directly at her. Crest had been managing this dimension himself. She knew because he had told her, through the household reference library communication method that was genuinely the most absurd logistics she had ever participated in, that the council question had been raised and that he was countering it through the formal record of the mate bond, which was ancient wolf law, which predated the council's authority, which no council in the Northern Territories' documented history had successfully legislated against. Valdenmoor Crest knew this, which was why his third move was the most dangerous one, and why it came from outside the official channels entirely. She found out about the third move from the most unlikely source. The source was a kitchen worker named Tef, a young man of about her age who had been at the keep for 3 years and who had, over the 2 years she had been there, become the closest thing she had to a friend in the household staff. Tef was easy company, observant without being strategic about it, and had the quality of someone who heard things because he was present in a lot of rooms without anyone feeling the need to stop talking when he came in. Tef came to find her in the North Wing laundry on a Tuesday morning. He looked uncomfortable. "I heard something," he said. "I'm not sure if it's true, and I'm not sure you want to know it. But I think you should know it." She set down the sheet she was folding. "Tell me." "There's a man," Tef said carefully. "Someone who came to the keep last week with the Southern delegation. He's been asking questions. Not about you specifically, not by name. About wolves who come from mixed status backgrounds. About Greyvale Pack." She went very still. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that are looking for something to use," Tef said. "About parentage. About whether someone's father had any outstanding obligations to other packs. He stopped. About whether someone might have a claim from another territory that would make them technically a representative of that territory rather than a freestanding individual." She stood very still in the laundry room and understood exactly what she was being told. Her father. She had known nothing about her father beyond the shoes by the door and the absence of the shoes. Her mother had told her very little, and what she had told her had been the edited version, the version stripped of anything complicated. But she had, in the 2 years at Valdenmoor, read a great many archive documents. And she had, 2 months ago, come across a reference in the correspondence files to an older territorial agreement between Greyvale Pack and a small eastern collective called Thornholt, an agreement about the obligations of wolves who had moved between territories in the relevant period. She had read it with the abstract interest she brought to all old documents. She had not thought about her father. She was thinking about her father now. "I need to access the correspondence archive," she said. "You don't have clearance for the correspondence archive," Tef said. "I know," she said. "I need access to it anyway." Tef looked at her. "How?" "You work in the kitchen," she said. "The kitchen is next to the archive anteroom. And you know where the archive anteroom key is kept because you told me 8 months ago when you were showing me the keep's undercroft layout." Tef was quiet for a moment. "I told you that in a completely different context," he said. "Yes," she agreed. He looked at her for a long moment. "What are they going to find?" he asked. "In your history." She thought about it. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I need to know before they do." The archive was exactly where Tef had described. She had 3 hours before the morning shift would bring people to that wing of the keep. She moved through the files with the speed of someone who had been navigating document archives for 2 years and understood the logic of how they were organized, pulling the relevant territorial agreements, the correspondence from the relevant period, the registry records. She found what she was looking for in an hour. She sat with it for another hour. Her father's name was Aaron Carrow. She had known that. His home pack had been Thornholt Collective. She had known that too, from her mother's rare mentions. What she had not known was that Aaron Carrow had, in the year before he came to Greyvale, been formally registered as a secondary heir to Thornholt's founding bloodline. Thornholt was a small collective. Secondary heir was not a prestigious position. In practical terms, it meant he was 3 steps removed from any meaningful claim and would have been 5th or 6th in a succession that had never become relevant. But the territorial agreements of that period, the ones governing the obligations of wolves who held any formal bloodline registration in multiple pack territories, contained specific provisions. Specifically, a child of a registered bloodline holder was entitled to recognition as a Thornholt-connected wolf for 1 generation. She was that child. She was, in the careful language of a 40-year-old territorial agreement, a wolf with a documented connection to Thornholt Collective. In ordinary circumstances, this would have meant nothing. She had never claimed it. She had never even known it. Thornholt Collective was a small, unremarkable Eastern pack that she had no connection to in any meaningful sense. In the current circumstances, with Belward Cress's agent asking about Greyvale and her father's background, it meant something specific. It meant that she was not the pack unaffiliated freestanding individual that the household staff registry categorized her as. It meant she was a Thornholt-connected wolf. And Thornholt Collective had, 6 years ago, been formally absorbed into Valdenmoor Pack through a territorial merger, which meant her wolf went very, very still, which meant that she was not an outsider. She was not an unranked wolf from a peripheral pack with no relevant standing. She was, through the strange, winding logic of a 40-year-old territorial agreement and a 6-year-old merger, a wolf of Valdenmoor. She was a wolf of his pack. She found Crest Aldric in the map room. She did not wait for their usual circumspect communication method. She walked through the keep with the correspondence documents under her arm, and she found him in the map room where he met with his war commanders every Tuesday morning, and she walked in. 14 wolves looked at her. Crest Aldric looked at her. She crossed the room. She put the documents on the table in front of him. "Belward is going to use this," she said quietly. "The Thornholt connection. He's going to use it to argue that I had an undisclosed pack affiliation, that I misrepresented my status when I was registered as a freestanding worker. It's technically accurate. It's also meaningless in any practical sense, but it gives him a procedural basis to challenge my standing here." She paused, but read the merger agreement, the one from 6 years ago. He picked up the document. He read. The map room was very quiet. The 14 war commanders exchanged looks with the specific discretion of wolves who understood they were present for something significant and had made a collective decision to be very professionally uninvolved. Crest Aldric set the document down. He looked at her. "You're Valdenmoor Pack," he said. "I have been for 6 years," she said. "I just didn't know it." Something moved through his face. Not surprise, exactly. Something more like the specific expression of a man who has been working on a problem for 2 weeks and has just watched it resolve in the most unexpected direction possible. "Belward hasn't read the merger agreement," he said. "The merger agreement is in the correspondence archive," she said, "which is restricted access, which you accessed, technically without authorization," she said. "Although I would argue that a wolf with documented Thornholt connection has a reasonable interest in documents pertaining to the Thornholt merger." The silence in the map room was the specific silence of 14 war commanders deciding that they had absolutely no opinion about any of this. Crest Aldric stood up. "This meeting is adjourned," he said to the room, in a voice that had the particular quality of a man who has just made a decision and has no remaining patience for anything that is not the execution of that decision. The room cleared. She was left standing on one side of the map table. He was standing on the other. "You knew he was going to use your background against you," he said. "I suspected. Tef told me what was being asked. You went into the archive alone. Yes. Without telling me. There wasn't time, and I needed to know before you did, she said. I needed to understand my own situation before it was explained to me by someone else. He held her gaze across the table. You have been doing that your whole life, he said. She looked at him. Figuring out your situation on your own, he said, before anyone else could define it for you. She was quiet. Someone had to, she said. He came around the table. He stopped in front of her. She held her ground. I need to tell you something, he said. Tell me. When you walked in here just now, he said, in front of 14 war commanders with the documents, I am aware of what that required. I am aware of what it costs someone in your position to walk into a room like this and do that. She said nothing. I want you to know that I see it, he said. Not just what you found. What it took to come find me. Her throat was tight. She had been managing very carefully not to be moved. She was a practical person. She dealt in documents and procedural logic and the clear-eyed assessment of situations. She did not, generally, as a rule, as the person she had become through the long practice of taking care of herself, she did not let herself be moved easily. She was moved. Don't let it change what you need to do, she said. The pack politics still need resolving. Belward still needs to be managed. The council. Pell. She stopped. The council will be fine, he said. I have been managing council since I was 26. What I haven't been doing is this. She looked at him. What is this? She asked. He reached out and tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear. The lightest possible touch, the kind of touch that was more acknowledgement than gesture, and said, something I am not going to let go of. The formal council acknowledgement of the mate bond was announced 6 days later. Belward Crest had, in the 48 hours before the announcement, made 2 more moves. Both were procedurally elegant. Both had been anticipated. Both had been countered, one by Crest directly, one by the Thornholt merger document, which, once formally entered into the record, made Pell's standing in Valdenmoor entirely unambiguous and Belward's entire line of attack structurally impossible to complete. She was pack. She had always been pack. The only thing that had been missing was the formal documentation. The formal documentation was now present. Belward had sat in the council chamber during the announcement with the expression of a man who had played a long game carefully and was watching it close in a direction he had not anticipated. It was not the expression of a broken man. A man of his capability and experience was never truly broken by a single political outcome, and he was too deeply embedded in the keep's governance to be removed over a personal disagreement with a royal decision. But he was outmaneuvered. He knew it. She knew it. Every wolf in the council chamber knew it. She watched him recalibrate. She found that genuinely interesting. Later, weeks later, when the immediate intensity had settled into the new ordinary of the situation, she had occasion to observe him in a council meeting, and she noticed that his recalibration had been more substantial than she had expected. He had shifted his position. Not on everything. He was still politically calculating, still thinking several moves ahead, still the architect of consensus that made the council functional. But the specific calculation that had organized his resistance, the calculation that saw her as a threat to his indispensability, had been replaced by something more pragmatic. She was indisputable now. The bond was acknowledged, the pack standing was documented, and the Alpha King's commitment was not something that could be moved against through institutional channels. Belward Crest had been doing this for 11 years. 11 years had taught him when a situation was concluded. He adapted. She watched him adapt with the specific respect she reserved for people who were genuinely good at what they did, even when what they did had been aimed at her. In the second month, he had come to her with a governance question. Not a test. A genuine question about the Eastern Territorial analysis she had brought to the map room, which he had apparently read, and which had raised a point about resource access that he had been unable to counter. She had answered it. They had talked for 20 minutes. It was, she reflected afterward, the most efficient political recalibration she had witnessed. She found it impressive in an entirely dispassionate way. Crest, when she told him, had looked at her with that amber-eyed attention and said, "You're not angry with him. He was doing his job," she said. "His job was to protect the political architecture he built. I was a threat to it. What he did was technically legitimate, even when it wasn't kind. Most people would be angry. I'm more interested in what he does next," she said. He shook his head slightly, with the specific expression she had learned to read as him being privately, quietly delighted by something she had said. She had come to like that expression very much. What changed was the quieter, more permanent things. The way she moved through the keep. Not with her old invisibility, not the practiced disappearance she had spent 2 years perfecting, but with a different kind of ease. Not performing authority, just present, fully, in the way of someone who has stopped editing themselves down to the size that fits without friction. She was given, 6 weeks after the formal acknowledgement, a governance role. Not a ceremonial title, not the nominal position that might have been offered as a courtesy. A real role, with real work attached to it. Oversight of the Eastern Territory's administrative correspondence, which had been managed by a rotating team of administrative officials for years and which had accumulated, as a result, a significant backlog of unresolved matters and a corresponding inconsistency in how similar situations were being handled in different districts. She had read 3 months of the backlog in 2 weeks and produced a 12-page analysis of the patterns. Crest had read the analysis and forwarded it to the relevant council committee with a notation that it should be treated as the foundational document for the Eastern administrative reform process. Belward Crest, who sat on the relevant council committee, had read it without comment during the meeting. He had come to her office the following day. "The section on resource allocation timing," he said. "You are drawing on information from the archive correspondence files." "Yes," she said. "Which you accessed." "I accessed information I had a legitimate interest in as a Thornholt-connected wolf," she said pleasantly. The Eastern Territorial agreements covered Thornholt extensively. He looked at her for a long moment. "Your analysis of the resource allocation sequence is correct," he said. "We have been solving this problem at the wrong end for 11 years. She waited. "I would like to discuss the implementation implications," he said. "If you have time." She did have time. They talked for an hour. It was, she reflected afterward, the most efficient political recalibration she had ever witnessed up close. Belward Crest had assessed the new landscape, identified where his expertise was still valuable within it, and reoriented himself toward that direction without drama and without the residual hostility that smaller people held on to. She found herself respecting him genuinely. She also found herself, in that respect, understanding something about Crest, about the man who had kept Belward in his role for 11 years despite knowing that his advisor was managing outcomes rather than advising honestly. He had known. He had allowed it because Belward was good at his work and the work needed doing. It was the pragmatism of a man who understood that people were complicated and that the useful thing was usually not the pure thing. She mentioned this to Crest. He looked at her with the expression she had come to love, the one where he was slightly surprised to find someone had followed a thread all the way to the place where it connected with something he had never said out loud. "You're not angry at him," he said, for the second time. "I was briefly," she said, "when Tef told me. But he was doing what he understood his job to be, and I was a threat to what he'd built, and honestly," she paused, "I would have done something similar if I were in his position." Crest looked at her. "That is either terrifying or reassuring," he said. "It's just honest," she said. He shook his head with the private, quiet delight she had come to love. Tef was promoted to senior kitchen staff in the spring. He accepted the promotion with the slightly surprised dignity of someone who had not entirely expected it, and came to find Pell in the planning room. She had a planning room now, a small one, for the governance work she had been given formal responsibility for, to tell her. "Did you have something to do with that?" he asked. She looked up from her documents. "You have been doing senior kitchen work for 1.5 years," she said. "The promotion was overdue." That's not an answer. I mentioned it to the household oversight officer, she said, because it was accurate. What happened after that was Quist's decision. Tef stood in her doorway with the expression of someone working through something. You're different, he said finally. I'm the same, she said. I just have a planning room. You walk differently, he said. You used to walk like you were trying not to take up space. Now you walk like, he searched for the word, like you're allowed to be going where you're going. She looked at him. I was always allowed, she said. I just didn't know it. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I think that's what I mean. What Pell Carrow came to understand, in the year after the mate bond was formally acknowledged and the year after that, and the years that followed, was something about the nature of belonging. She had spent her life treating belonging as something that was given by the people around you, as the collective decision of a community about whether you fit within it. She had accepted that framework so completely, for so long, that she had organized her entire interior life around it, made herself smaller, quieter, more useful, more invisible, trying to reduce the friction of existing somewhere she wasn't sure she was fully welcome. And then she had taken a wrong turn in the dark with a pile of linens in her arms, and she had stumbled into a room she had no right to be in, and a man who had been the Alpha King since he was 26 had said, "Put the linens down," not as a command, but as an invitation. She understood now, the kind of invitation that disguises itself as a command because neither person is quite ready for it to be an invitation yet. And something had begun. And what she understood, in the aftermath of the beginning, was this. Belonging was not something that was given to you. It was something you brought with you. She had always belonged. She had belonged at the end of the table in Greyvale, even when they put her there. She had belonged in the keep's corridors and the household reference library and the correspondence archive she was technically not supposed to access. She had belonged, from the very first night, in the study with the fireplace and the document-covered desk and the man who had listened to her as though what she said was worth listening to. She had belonged all along. She had simply had to find, in the particular darkness of a wrong corridor, the door that led her through to herself. The wrong door had been the right one. It always was. If this story found you, I mean really found you, you already know why. Because Pell Carrow wasn't found by a king. She was found by a door she wasn't supposed to open, and a conversation that wasn't supposed to happen, and the slow, terrifying, extraordinary discovery that she had been worth seeing this whole time. And maybe you have been standing in a corridor, in the dark, counting doors, trying to find the right one, trying to find the place where you fit without friction, trying to figure out if you are allowed to be going where you are going. You are allowed. You have always been allowed. This channel exists for everyone who has ever taken a wrong turn and found something they couldn't have found if they'd stayed on the path. Every week, we tell stories about that. About wolves who stumbled into the right place. About bonds that found people who weren't looking. About doors that opened into lives that were larger than what was planned. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Drop your location in the comments because you are not watching this alone. There are people from every country in the comments, and one of them is probably from right where you are, and they needed to hear this today too. Don't miss the next one. It opens with a wrong door too.